Kafka is an open source distributed event streaming platform. It's fault tolerant, super scalable, has a robust community, and a powerful integration ecosystem. There's a lot to love, which might make Kafka your first option for building streaming architectures. But what if you don't want to use Kafka? Let's talk about it. Kafka is great for a lot of use cases, especially mission-critical ones. There's a reason companies like Netflix, Twitter, and Airbnb use it. That said, it is notoriously complex to set up. Unless you go with a managed Kafka service, you'll have to set up the infrastructure yourself. It's not built for analytical workloads, and it tends to require a lot of configuration. Put simply, despite being very powerful and very popular, Kafka is not known for being developer-friendly. So sometimes you want something simpler than Kafka, especially if you don't have the resources of a Netflix, Twitter, or Airbnb. If that's the case, you should check out the Tinybird Events API. The Events API is a high-frequency ingestion endpoint that lets you stream JSON data directly from your data-producing apps into a Tinybird data source. What makes the Events API so dev-friendly is that it's just an HTTP request, so you don't need Tinybird-specific libraries. If you're coding JavaScript, you can use the standard fetch, or if you prefer, Axios. And if you're working with Python, you can use the ever-popular request library. Or you can just use a simple curl. The point is, you can use whatever request library you want. All you need is a free Tinybird account and a desire to build something on top of streaming data. With the Events API, you can send thousands of events per second to Tinybird directly from your applications. Once your events land in Tinybird, you can then query them using chained composable SQL nodes called pipes and publish the result of those pipes as an API endpoint in a single click. As new streaming data hits the Events API, your published Tinybird APIs will automatically serve the latest results without you needing to lift a finger. Note that Tinybird natively supports data ingestion from Kafka, and ingesting Kafka streams into Tinybird is actually really easy. But the Tinybird Events API is about as simple as it gets, and so if you aren't already using Kafka or you can't be bothered to set it up, try the Events API. To help you get going, here's a simple example of the Tinybird Events API, just so you can see how it works. So what we have here is a basic Python script that's going to generate some synthetic events data and send it to Tinybird using the Events API. Let's assume these events are from a collaborative file editing software. Think Google Docs. This script generates some randomized file editing events, packages a handful of them together in JSON, and issues a request to the Tinybird Events endpoint to stream that data into a Tinybird data source. As the events start streaming, we'll jump into the Tinybird UI in the browser. When I refresh the data source, you can see the new rows being added. Now I'll create a pipe, one of those sets of chained SQL nodes I mentioned earlier. This simple one will just count the number of events grouped by user. Keep in mind that this pipe is just a single node with a handful of lines of SQL. But if I wanted to, I could easily add new nodes that query over the results from prior nodes. I'm really only constrained by the pretty expansive boundaries of SQL. Once that's done, I'll click up here to publish the node as an API endpoint, and boom. Why the confetti? Because, to be honest, that was so easy, it kind of deserves a celebration. Now, I'll copy that request and paste it into the browser, refresh, 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 and you can see how the results constantly update as the new data hits the Events API. And that's it. So, if you're looking for something a little leaner than Kafka, consider the Tinybird Events API. It's the easiest way to turn streaming data into real-time analytics APIs.